Hello, my dear lore seekers. Welcome back to another evening of shared stories. Tonight, our path takes us not to a battlefield of gods and monsters, nor to the distant, star-strewn future, but to a quiet corner of the English countryside, to a history that is at once both humble and profoundly significant. It is a story of a family, a lineage that for centuries remained a quiet tributary to the great river of wizarding history before finding itself in a flash of green light at the very heart of the torrent. We shall trace a line that stretches nearly 1,000 years from a kindly, eccentric potioneer pottering in his garden to a young couple's last defiant stand in a cottage filled with love and fear. Settle in, quiet your mind, and let us explore the deep, winding, and often forgotten history of the family that gave the wizarding world its greatest hero, as we uncover the complete story of the Potter family, from Stinchcombe to Godric's Hollow. Before we begin, if you find value in our stories, please take a moment to like and subscribe, or check out our Patreon link in the description below. Your support is what allows us to continue these journeys together. We appreciate it more than you know. And now, let's begin. The Potterer of Stinchcombe. Our story begins in the 12th century, a time that feels almost impossibly distant to us now. An era shrouded in mist and superstition, where the line between magic and mundane was not a clean, sharp break, but a blurred, shifting border. The great magical institutions we know today were either in their infancy or did not yet exist. Hogwarts itself was a relatively new creation, a bold experiment in formal magical education. The Ministry of Magic was centuries away from its formation, and the International Statute of Secrecy, that great law that now governs and protects our world, was not even a whisper on the wind. In this age, the wizarding world and the muggle world coexisted in a state of uneasy intimacy. There was no Diagon Alley to retreat to, no magical villages hidden behind complex charms. Witches and wizards lived amongst their non-magical neighbors, their lives interwoven in a complex tapestry of neighborly kindness, fearful suspicion, and all too often, outright persecution. The witch hunts that would later scar the continent were beginning to smolder, and any sign of abnormality, any harvest that failed or milk that soured, could be blamed on the dark arts. For a wizard or witch, survival depended on discretion, on the ability to blend in, to appear ordinary or at the very least harmlessly eccentric. It is in this precarious world, in the small, unassuming village of Stinchcombe, nestled in the rolling green hills of the Cotswolds in western England, that we find the patriarch of our story, a man named Linfred. To his muggle neighbors, Linfred was a fixture of the village, a man as familiar and comforting as the ancient stones of the local church. They saw him as a vague, absent-minded old fellow, slightly peculiar but utterly harmless. His clothes were often earth-stained, his hair perpetually untidy, and he had a habit of muttering to his plants. They gave him the affectionate nickname, the Potterer. a name born from his most defining characteristic, his habit of constantly pottering about in his garden. This garden was a source of local wonder. It was a chaotic, sprawling Eden, overflowing with a bewildering array of strange and wonderful plants, many of which the villagers had never seen before. They bloomed at odd times of the year and gave off peculiar scents. But the villagers, lacking any other frame of reference, simply put it down to Linfred's uncanny green thumb. When their children came down with the pox, their skin erupting in painful sores, or when a nagging cough settled deep in the chest and turned into a rattling, life-threatening ague, they would often call upon old Linfred. He would listen patiently to their troubles, his gentle eyes full of concern, nodding his head with a quiet smile. He would then retreat into his cluttered cottage, the air thick with the smell of drying herbs and simmering concoctions, and return a short time later with a poultice, a strangely colored liquid, or a salve that worked with astonishing efficacy. The fevers would break, the coughs would subside, the sores would heal without a scar. The Muggles of Stinchcombe were deeply grateful for their resident medicine man. They saw him as a lovable eccentric, a man with a gifted, almost magical connection to the earth and its healing properties. They never once suspected that his wonderful cures were not the result of herbalism, but of pure, unadulterated magic. They did not realize that behind the closed doors of his cottage, Linfred of Stinchcombe was a brilliant and inventive wizard, a potioneer of considerable and original talent. His reputation as a harmless eccentric was the perfect cover, a cloak of benign oddity that allowed him to live and work in peace. It allowed him to conduct the series of experiments that would not only serve his immediate community, but would also lay the very foundation for his family's future prosperity. Wizarding historians and potioneering scholars now credit Linfred as the originator of several remedies that, over the centuries, were refined and developed into potions still stocked in the cupboards of St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries. Two of his most famous creations were Skelly Grow and the Pepper Up Potion. Consider the genius behind these inventions. The Pepper Up Potion, a staple for any wizard suffering from the common cold, is a complex brew that not only alleviates symptoms, but actively combats the magical germs that cause them. Its side effect, causing steam to pour from the drinker's ears for several hours, is a small price to pay for instant relief. To create such a potion required a deep understanding of magical biology and the intricate interactions of ingredients like bicorn horn and mandrake root. Skelly Grow is an even more remarkable feat of potioneering. The potion is famously unpleasant to drink, but its effects are nothing short of miraculous. It can regrow entire bones, a process that is both painful and lengthy, but life-saving. The magical principles involved in such a feat are staggering. It requires the potioneer to not only understand the physical structure of the human skeleton, but to imbue the potion with the magical instructions to replicate it perfectly. From the largest femur to the tiniest bone in the inner ear. It is a testament to Linfred's quiet, unassuming brilliance. He was not just a healer, he was a pioneer, an innovator working at the very frontiers of magical medicine. Word of his skills spread through the magical community, not through advertisements or publications, but through the quiet, word-of-mouth network that witches and wizards relied upon in those secretive times. Fellow magical folk would seek him out, traveling discreetly to his small village, often under the cover of darkness, to purchase his unique and effective cures. The gold began to accumulate, but Linfred's lifestyle never changed. He remained the same vague, kind-hearted potterer in the eyes of his muggle neighbors. He lived simply, his greatest joys still found in the cultivation of his magical plants and the quiet satisfaction of a potion perfectly brewed. It was this quiet brand of ingenuity, this ability to thrive while remaining unseen, to be brilliant without being boastful, that would become a hallmark of his descendants. In time, the affectionate nickname, the Potterer, became corrupted, smoothed, and shortened by the tongues of generations until it settled into the surname we know today, Potter. Upon his death, Linfred of Stinchcombe, the eccentric village healer, the secret potioneering genius, was able to leave a significant pile of gold to each of his 7 children. It was not a lord's fortune, but it was a solid foundation, a legacy of security and prosperity, built not on inherited titles or grand estates, but on hard work, cleverness, and a deep understanding of magic. And it was his eldest son, Hardwin, who would take this solid foundation and make a marriage that would alter the destiny of the Potter line forever, weaving it into a story far older and far more mysterious than its own. The Peverell inheritance. Hardwin Potter, having inherited his father's good sense and a not insignificant portion of his wealth, was a respected young wizard in his own right. He continued the family tradition of quiet competence, though his talents lay less in potioneering and more in charms and transfiguration. But his true legacy, the act that would echo down through the centuries, was secured not through any spell he cast, but through the woman he fell in love with, a beautiful and powerful young witch named Iolanthe Peverell. Iolanthe hailed from the village of Godric's Hollow, a name that would, in time, become synonymous with bravery, sacrifice, and the very deepest currents of magic. Even then, Godric's Hollow was a special place. It was one of the few settlements in Britain that was a true wizarding village, a place where magical families could live in relative openness, their homes infused with charms, and their lives governed by the rhythms of the magical world. It was named, of course, for one of the 4 founders of Hogwarts, Godric Gryffindor, who was himself born there. It was a village steeped in history, and Iolanthe Peverell was a daughter of one of its oldest and most enigmatic families. For those of you who have sat with me on previous evenings, you will know the name Peverell. It is a name that resonates with the oldest and deepest magic, a name synonymous with one of the most enduring and powerful legends in the wizarding world, the legend of the Deathly Hallows. This story, first codified for a wider audience by Beedle the Bard in his classic collection of wizarding fairy tales, is one that every magical child grows up knowing. But unlike Muggle fairy tales, this one, as we now know, is rooted in absolute truth. Let us recount that tale now, as Iolanthe might have told it to Hardwin on a quiet evening, the firelight flickering in their hearth. Once upon a time, 3 brothers were traveling along a lonely, winding road at twilight. In time, the brothers reached a river too deep to wade through and too dangerous to swim across. However, these brothers were learned in the magical arts, and so they simply waved their wands and made a bridge appear across the treacherous water. They were halfway across it when they found their path blocked by a hooded figure, and it was Death. He was angry that he had been cheated of 3 new victims, for travelers usually drowned in the river. But Death was cunning. He pretended to congratulate the 3 brothers upon their magic, and said that each had earned a prize for having been clever enough to evade him. So the oldest brother, who was a combative man, asked for a wand more powerful than any in existence, a wand that must always win duels for its owner, a wand worthy of a wizard who had conquered Death. So Death crossed to an elder tree on the banks of the river, fashioned a wand from a branch that hung there, and gave it to the oldest brother. This was the Elder Wand. Then the second brother, who was an arrogant man, decided that he wanted to humiliate Death still further, and asked for the power to recall others from Death. So Death picked up a stone from the riverbank and gave it to the second brother, and told him that the stone would have the power to bring back the dead. This was the Resurrection Stone. And then Death asked the third and youngest brother what he would like. The youngest brother was the most humble and also the wisest of the brothers, and he did not trust Death. So he asked for something that would enable him to go forth from that place without being followed by Death. And Death, most unwillingly, handed over his own cloak of invisibility. Then Death stood aside and allowed the 3 brothers to continue on their way, and they did so, talking with wonder of the adventure they had had, and admiring Death's gifts. In due course, the brothers separated, each for his own destination. The first brother traveled on for a week or more, and reaching a distant village, sought out a fellow wizard with whom he had a quarrel. Naturally, with the Elder Wand as his weapon, he could not fail to win the duel that followed. Leaving his enemy dead upon the floor, the oldest brother proceeded to an inn, where he boasted loudly of the powerful wand he had snatched from Death himself, and of how it made him invincible. That very night, another wizard crept upon the oldest brother as he lay sleeping, drunk upon the wine. The thief took the wand and, for good measure, slit the oldest brother's throat. And so Death took the first brother for his own. Meanwhile, the second brother journeyed to his own home, where he lived alone. Here he took out the stone that had the power to recall the dead, and turned it thrice in his hand. To his amazement and his delight, the figure of the girl he had once hoped to marry, before her untimely death, appeared at once before him. Yet she was sad and cold, separated from him as by a veil. Though she had returned to the mortal world, she did not truly belong there and suffered. Finally, the second brother, driven mad with hopeless longing, killed himself so as to truly join her. And so Death took the second brother for his own. But though Death searched for the third brother for many years, he was never able to find him. It was only when he had attained a great age that the youngest brother finally took off the cloak of invisibility and gave it to his son. And then he greeted death as an old friend, and went with him gladly, and equals, they departed this life. This youngest brother, the wise and humble Ignotus, was Iolanthe Peverell's direct ancestor, while the other two Hallows, the Elder Wand and the Resurrection Stone, had been lost to history, passed from bloody hand to bloody hand. The cloak of invisibility had been treasured. It had been passed down not as a weapon or a tool of power, but as a family heirloom, a symbol of Ignotus's wisdom. In the absence of any male heirs in her generation, Iolanthe, as the eldest, had inherited this incredible artifact. When she married Hardwin Potter, she shared this profound secret with him. She explained the tradition of her family, that the existence of the cloak, its true nature as one of the fabled Deathly Hallows, was a closely guarded secret, a legacy to be protected and passed down with care and respect. Hardwin, a man who had inherited his own father's discretion and quiet wisdom, respected his wife's wishes implicitly. And so the Cloak of Invisibility, a legendary artifact of unimaginable value and power, was woven into the fabric of the Potter family. From that time on, it was handed down to the eldest child in each new generation, its true nature and history, a secret whispered from parent to child in the quiet moments of their lives, a sacred trust passed from one hand to the next. The humble, practical, and hard-working Potter line was now the guardian of a piece of the deepest and most ancient magic the world had ever known. A legacy of integrity. For several centuries following this momentous union, the Potter family continued to live much as they always had. The addition of the invisibility cloak to their family Gringotts vault did not change their fundamental character. They remained in the west of England, solid, hard-working, and respected members of the wizarding community. They did not boast of their newfound connection to the legendary Peverells, nor did they use the cloak for personal gain or glory. It was a secret, a responsibility, and they honored it. They continued to marry their neighbors, and occasionally muggles, a practice that kept their bloodline grounded and their perspective broad. This, however, was a source of quiet disapproval among the increasingly powerful and arrogant pure-blood factions of the wizarding world. To families like the Malfoys or the Blacks, who prided themselves on the untainted purity of their magical lineage, the Potters' acceptance of Muggles was a sign of weakness, a dilution of their magical strength. This attitude would eventually lead to the Potters' exclusion from the so-called Sacred 28, a list of supposedly pure-blood families published in the 1930s. Each generation of Potters added to the family coffers, not through grand schemes or dark deeds, but through that same quiet brand of ingenuity that had characterized old Linfred. They were potioneers, inventors, and skilled artisans. One Potter, for instance, developed a new, more effective method for waterproofing wizarding tents, a seemingly minor invention that was nonetheless highly profitable. Another bred a new strain of self-fertilizing fanged geraniums, making them much safer for domestic cultivation. They were not at the forefront of wizarding history, content with a comfortable and peaceful existence in the backwaters. But this quiet life was not to last forever. As the family grew in prosperity and influence, so too did its willingness to step onto the larger stage of the wizarding world. Occasionally, a potter would make their way to London, and twice, a member of the family would take a seat on the highest court of the land, the Wizengamot. The first of these was Ralston Potter, who was a member of the Wizengamot from 1612 to 1652. This was a particularly tumultuous time in wizard-muggle relations. The persecutions that had simmered for centuries were boiling over. The Muggle world was becoming more organized, more scientific, and more suspicious. The days of a wizard being able to pass off a magical cure as simple herbalism were drawing to a close. The wizarding community was deeply divided on how to respond to this growing threat. There was a vocal and militant faction within the Wizengamot, led by radical purebloods, who argued for declaring all-out war on the Muggles. Their rhetoric was persuasive and dangerous. They spoke of magical superiority, of a wizard's right to rule. They painted a picture of a world where wizards would no longer have to hide in the shadows, where their power would be acknowledged and feared. They saw Muggles as little more than beasts, to be subjugated or eradicated. Ralston Potter was a powerful and articulate voice of opposition to this faction. He stood before the Wizengamot and argued passionately not for war, but for the opposite, for complete and total separation. He was a great supporter of what would eventually become the International Statute of Secrecy. He argued that segregation, not war, was the only way to ensure the long-term survival and peace of the wizarding world. He painted a different picture, one of a world where wizards could live freely without fear of persecution in their own hidden communities. He spoke of the need to protect their culture, their knowledge, and their children from a Muggle world that would never understand them. His advocacy for secrecy over conflict was influential, and his measured, sensible approach helped to sway the moderate members of the Wizengamot. He helped to lay the crucial groundwork for the most important law in modern wizarding history, a law that would be formally enacted in 1692 and would shape the destiny of the wizarding world forever. Generations later, another Potter would take his seat on that same high court and display an even more radical brand of political courage, one that went beyond simply advocating for his own people. His name was Henry Potter, though his friends and family affectionately called him Harry. He served on the Wizengamot from 1913 to 1921. His tenure coincided with one of the darkest and most brutal periods in Muggle history, the First World War. The wizarding community watched in horror as the Muggle world tore itself apart. The sheer scale of the mechanized slaughter, the horrors of trench warfare, the use of poison gas. It was a level of self-destruction that was both baffling and terrifying to a community that could heal most wounds with the flick of a wand. The official stance, however, dictated by the then Minister for Magic, Archer Evermond, was one of strict, cold non-intervention. Evermond issued a decree forbidding any witch or wizard from offering any aid to the Muggles. He argued that it risked exposing their world on an unprecedented scale, and that, in any case, the Muggles' war was not their fight. Henry Potter publicly and vehemently disagreed. He stood up in the middle of the Wizengamot chamber, his voice ringing with righteous anger, and condemned Minister Evermond's policy as cowardly and immoral. He caused a considerable scandal, his words reported with relish in the Daily Prophet. He argued that it was the wizarding community's moral duty to help the Muggles in their time of desperate need, that a shared humanity transcended the magical divide. He pointed out that wizards were not immune to the consequences of such a massive conflict, and that to stand by and do nothing while millions suffered was a stain on the soul of their world. His outspokenness on behalf of the Muggle community was seen by many of the old pure-blood families as deeply improper, even treasonous. It confirmed all their worst suspicions about the Potter family and their Muggle-loving tendencies. This pro-Muggle stance, this radical empathy for the non-magical world, was the final nail in the coffin for any chance the Potters had of being included in the Sacred 28. The anonymous compiler of that list, a pure-blood supremacist named Cantankerous Knot, undoubtedly saw Henry Potter's actions as proof that the Potter bloodline had been irrevocably tainted. To Henry Potter, this exclusion was likely a point of honor. He had stood for what was right, not what was fashionable among the magical elite. He had continued the Potter legacy of quiet integrity, even when it meant shouting his convictions from the rooftops of power. His courage and his compassion for all of humanity, magical and non-magical alike, would be a legacy passed down to his descendants, a moral compass that would, in time, guide them through even darker days. The golden age of Fleamont and Euphemia. Henry's son was named Fleamont Potter. It was an unusual, even peculiar name, and one that caused him a considerable amount of grief during his school years at Hogwarts. It was the dying wish of Henry's mother that her son perpetuate her maiden name, which would otherwise die out. Fleamont, a boy of considerable character, bore the name with fortitude. The incessant teasing he endured for it, particularly from the more brutish elements of Slytherin House, likely contributed to his formidable skill as a duelist, as he often found himself in fights to defend his honor. He was, unsurprisingly, sorted into Gryffindor, a house that valued his courage, his loyalty, and his fiery spirit. But Fleamont's true genius, his deepest passion, did not lie in dueling. It lay in a field that seemed to run deep in the Potter blood, a direct and potent inheritance from his distant ancestor, Linfred of Stinchcombe. Fleamont Potter was a master potioneer. He had an intuitive understanding of the subtle art and exact science of potion making, a flair for combining ingredients in new and unexpected ways. After graduating from Hogwarts, he took the respectable family fortune that had been built over centuries of quiet hard work and quadrupled it seemingly overnight. He did so through a single brilliant invention, Sleek Easy's hair potion. The potion came with the catchy, unforgettable slogan, 2 drops, tames even the most bothersome Barnet. In a world of unruly wizard's hair, which often had a life and mind of its own, it was a sensation. It was the kind of practical, ingenious magic that the Potters excelled at. The potion was a carefully balanced mixture of gillyweed, flobberworm mucus, and several other, more secret ingredients. It was non-permanent, easy to apply, and gave hair a lustrous shine without making it greasy. It was wildly popular, not just in Britain, but across the magical world. Fleamont became an incredibly wealthy man. He eventually sold his company for a vast profit when he retired, ensuring that his family would want for nothing for generations to come. He had taken his family's legacy of quiet ingenuity and turned it into a commercial empire. But for all their riches, for all their success, Fleamont and his beloved wife, Euphemia, felt a profound and aching emptiness in their lives. They desperately wanted a child, a son or daughter, to fill their large, beautiful home with laughter and to carry on the Potter name, but they were unable to conceive. They tried for years, visiting the most renowned healers at St. Mungo's, consulting with magical specialists from around the world, and trying every fertility potion and charm known to wizard kind, but to no avail. As they grew older, they had quite given up hope of ever having a child of their own. Their vast, echoing home became a lonely place, a gilded cage filled with gold, but devoid of the one thing they truly desired. And then, to their profound shock and overwhelming joy, when they were well into their old age and had long since resigned themselves to a childless life, Euphemia discovered that she was pregnant. Their beloved boy, James, was born. He was their miracle, the impossible child of their twilight years, and they adored him with a fierce and boundless love. He was cherished, perhaps even spoiled, but he was raised in a home filled with an overwhelming amount of affection, a love made all the more precious and potent by the long, sad years of waiting. Fleamont and Euphemia lived long enough to see James grow into a clever, confident, and exceptionally talented young wizard. They saw him sorted into Gryffindor at Hogwarts, just as his father had been. They watched with immense pride as he became a star chaser on the Gryffindor Quidditch team, his natural flying ability a sight to behold. And when James's best friend, a rebellious and devastatingly handsome boy named Sirius Black, ran away from his own dark, cruel, pure-blood-obsessed family at the age of 16, Fleamont and Euphemia did not hesitate for a moment. They opened their home and their hearts to him. They took Sirius in, treating him as a second son, giving him the unconditional love and supportive family he had never known in the grim, oppressive atmosphere of Number 12 Grimmauld Place. They lived to see James marry a brilliant and fiercely kind Muggle-born witch named Lily Evans. They adored Lily, seeing in her the same courage, integrity, and compassion that had defined the best of the Potter line. Their marriage, a union of a pure blood from an ancient and wealthy family and a Muggle born of extraordinary talent, was a perfect embodiment of the Potter family's long-held values of love over blood status. But tragically, they would not live to meet their grandson. Fleamont and Euphemia, having been so blessed in their old age, contracted dragonpox. It was a severe and often fatal illness for any wizard, but for an elderly couple, it was a death sentence. They passed away within days of each other, their long and loving life together ending as it had been lived in each other's company. They left their considerable fortune, their legacy of kindness, and the family's most precious and ancient secret, the invisibility cloak, to their only son, James. James was now the head of the Potter family, a young man on the cusp of true adulthood, with a loving wife, a vast inheritance, and a dark and terrible war brewing on the horizon that would demand everything from him, and more. The Marauders of Hogwarts. James Potter arrived at Hogwarts in September of 1971. A whirlwind of confidence, talent, and boundless energy. He was the product of a loving home and a pampered upbringing, and it showed. He was charming, popular, and just a little bit arrogant. On the Hogwarts Express, he met Sirius Black, and their friendship was immediate and absolute. They were two sides of the same coin. James, the beloved only child from a warm, supportive home. Sirius, the rebellious, unloved heir of a dark and cruel family. They recognized in each other a shared love of adventure, a profound disdain for authority, and a brilliant, mischievous spirit. They were destined to be best friends. In that same train carriage, they also met two other first years who would shape their lives. One was a quiet, intelligent boy with shabby, patched-up robes and a perpetually worried expression named Remus Lupin. The other was a sallow-skinned, hook-nosed boy from Slytherin named Severus Snape, who was sitting with a fiery, red-headed girl with startlingly green eyes named Lily Evans. The immediate animosity that flared between the swaggering, popular James and the sullen, brooding Snape, and the equally immediate fascination James had for the sharp-tongued and unimpressed Lily, would set the course for much of their school careers. Once at Hogwarts, James, Sirius, and Remus were all sorted into Gryffindor. They soon took a fourth boy under their wing, a short, slow, and rather timid boy named Peter Pettigrew, who seemed to hero-worship their confidence and talent. The four became inseparable, a legendary group of troublemakers who viewed themselves, not without some justification, as the rock stars of Hogwarts. James was the undisputed leader, the Quidditch hero who would mess up his dark, untidy hair to make it look even more windswept after a match, and who would constantly toss a golden snitch he had stolen from the Quidditch sheds just for effect. Sirius was the effortlessly cool, handsome rebel, defying his family's Slytherin legacy by plastering their Gryffindor Tower dormitory with Gryffindor banners, pictures of scantily clad Muggle girls, and roaring motorcycles. Remus was the brains of the operation, the voice of reason, the one who tried and often failed to keep his friends' more reckless impulses in check. And Peter was their adoring fan, their loyal follower, basking in the reflected glow of their popularity. They called themselves the Marauders. But their golden school days, their years of laughter, rule-breaking, and adventure, had a dark and painful secret at their core. Remus Lupin carried a terrible affliction. As a young child, he had been attacked and bitten by the vicious werewolf, Fenrir Greyback, one of the most savage and feared werewolves in the world. Now, at every full moon, Remus underwent a painful and dangerous transformation into a slavering, uncontrollable beast. His parents had feared he would never be able to attend school, but Albus Dumbledore, in his characteristic wisdom and compassion, had made special arrangements. A secret tunnel was created, its entrance hidden beneath the thrashing branches of the Whomping Willow on the school grounds. This tunnel led to a remote, fortified house in the village of Hogsmeade, the house that would become known as the Shrieking Shack, where Remus could transform in safety without endangering himself or his fellow students. For years, Remus kept his secret, lying to his friends, making up stories about his sick mother to explain his monthly disappearances. He was terrified that they would abandon him in fear and disgust if they ever knew the truth. He lived in constant fear of being discovered, of being ostracized, of being alone. But James, Sirius, and Peter were far more clever and far more loyal than Remus gave them credit for. By their second year, they had pieced together the clues, the monthly disappearances that always coincided with the full moon, the tired, pale, and scarred appearance of their friend in the days leading up to it. And when they finally confronted him with their discovery, they did not desert him. They did not shun him. Instead, they did something that was not only incredibly advanced, dangerous, and illegal magic, but a testament to the extraordinary depth of their friendship. They decided to become animagi. An animagus is a witch or wizard who can transform themselves into an animal at will. It is a process of immense difficulty and complexity, a process that takes years of dedication and carries enormous risks. A mistake in the transfiguration can lead to horrific, permanent, half-human, half-animal mutations. The process involves holding the leaf of a mandrake in the mouth for an entire month, brewing a complex potion using the leaf that must be left to mature until the next electrical storm, and then reciting a complex incantation at the moment the storm breaks. It is so dangerous that it is highly regulated by the Ministry of Magic. The Marauders accomplished this feat illegally and in secret by their 5th year. Each of them took on the form of an animal that suited their personality and would be useful to their lycanthropic friend. James, with his proud, protective nature and his leadership qualities, became a magnificent stag, a creature large and powerful enough to keep a werewolf in check. This earned him the nickname Prongs. Serious, sleek, powerful, and a little intimidating, became a great black dog, like a Grim, giving him the name Padfoot. And Peter, small, unobtrusive, and able to slip through the cracks unnoticed, became a rat, whom they called Wormtail. Remus, of course, was given the affectionate nickname Moony on account of his monthly condition. Their transformations changed everything. Remus's monthly ordeal was no longer a time of lonely agony and self-harm. His friends, in their animal forms, could join him. A werewolf, it turns out, is only a danger to humans. The presence of the stag, the dog, and the rat calmed the wolf within Remus. They could keep their friend's wolfish spirits up, preventing him from harming himself and turning the transformation into something closer to a wild, exhilarating adventure. Together, under the light of the full moon, they would slip out of the castle through the tunnel under the Whomping Willow. They would roam the forbidden forest and the school grounds under the cover of darkness. 4 friends united against the world, their bond forged in secrecy and absolute loyalty. Their friendship made his transformations not only bearable, but, as Remus would later say, the best times of his life. Their detailed, illicit exploration of the castle and its grounds led to their greatest and most audacious creation, the Marauder's Map. Using a complex and powerful charm of their own invention, the homunculus charm, they bewitched a piece of parchment to show a complete and detailed layout of Hogwarts' School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. It showed not only the classrooms, corridors, and common rooms, but also all of its secret passages, including the 7 that they had discovered and used. Most remarkably, the map showed the real-time location of every single person within the castle, marked by a tiny moving dot labeled with their name. The map, which could only be activated by touching it with a wand and uttering the phrase, "I solemnly swear that I am up to no good," and wiped clean by mischief managed, was a masterpiece of underage magic, a testament to their combined genius and their unquenchable love of breaking rules. Throughout these years of mischief and profound friendship, James Potter maintained 2 constants in his life: his deep and abiding loyalty to the Marauders, and his relentless and for a long time utterly unsuccessful pursuit of Lily Evans. For years, Lily saw him as nothing more than an arrogant, bullying toe-rag. She despised the way he and Sirius strutted around the castle as if they owned it, and she particularly hated the way they relentlessly tormented her childhood friend, Severus Snape. One particular incident in their 5th year, after they had completed their OWL exams, was a turning point. James, in a fit of boredom and arrogance, decided to publicly humiliate Snape. He and Sirius hexed him, levitated him upside down, revealing his grubby underpants to a crowd of laughing students. Lily intervened, her green eyes flashing with fury. She defended Snape, telling James to leave him alone. James, in an attempt to impress her, agreed, but only if she would go out with him. Lily, disgusted, retorted that she wouldn't go out with him if she had the choice between him and the giant squid. In his own humiliation and rage, Snape lashed out at Lily, the one person who was trying to help him, and called her a mudblood. That single, vile, unforgivable word ended their friendship forever. But it did not immediately endear James to her. It wasn't until their 7th year that James finally began to mature. He was made head boy, a responsibility that seemed to sober him. He deflated his enormous ego, stopped hexing people for the fun of it, and began to show the courageous, loyal, and noble heart that lay beneath the layers of teenage arrogance. Lily, who had been made head girl, began to see the person her friends had always known was there. She saw his unwavering loyalty to his friends, his quiet acts of kindness, and his fierce determination to do what was right. She finally saw the man he was becoming, and she fell deeply and irrevocably in love with him. They left Hogwarts in the summer of 1978. Two brilliant, powerful young wizards, deeply in love, and walked straight into a world that was being consumed by war. Lord Voldemort and his Death Eaters were at the height of their power. Fear and paranoia gripped the wizarding world. Muggles and Muggleborns were being tortured and killed on a daily basis, and anyone who dared to oppose Voldemort was being hunted down and eliminated. James and Lily, brave and defiant to their very cores, did not hesitate for a second to join the fight. Along with Sirius Black, Remus Lupin, and Peter Pettigrew, they became full-time members of the Order of the Phoenix, a secret society founded by Albus Dumbledore to fight Voldemort and his followers. The First Wizarding War, the Order of the Phoenix was massively outnumbered. They were a small, secret army, fighting a desperate, guerrilla war against Voldemort's ever-growing forces. They fought in the shadows, their missions covert, their successes rarely known, their losses frequent and devastating. James and Lily, fresh out of Hogwarts, quickly established themselves as two of Dumbledore's most dedicated and valuable fighters. They were talented, they were brave, and they were fiercely committed to protecting the innocent. They faced death on an almost daily basis, seeing friends and comrades fall around them. It was during this time, in the heat of battle and under the constant shadow of death, that they defied Lord Voldemort himself on 3 separate occasions. What these 3 defiances were exactly is not recorded in the annals of official history, but we can surmise from the nature of the conflict. The first defiance may well have been Voldemort's own attempt to recruit them. As a talented pure blood from an ancient and wealthy family, James would have been a prized recruit for the Death Eaters. Lily, as a Muggle born of extraordinary and rare magical ability, would have been a powerful symbol of Voldemort's ability to recognize and co-opt talent regardless of blood. Their refusal, their outright and contemptuous defiance of the Dark Lord's personal offer, would have been an unforgivable insult, an act of rebellion that marked them for death. The other 2 defiances were likely direct confrontations. Perhaps they were ambushed by Voldemort himself, and through a combination of skill, luck, and raw power, managed to fight their way out and escape, a feat that very few could claim. Perhaps they were instrumental in a successful Order mission that thwarted one of Voldemort's key plans, or led to the capture of several of his most valuable Death Eaters. Whatever the specific events were, they marked James and Lily. They were known and hated enemies of the Dark Lord, and they had survived his wrath not once, not twice, but 3 times. They were symbols of resistance, a source of hope for the beleaguered wizarding world. In the midst of this terrifying war, James and Lily found moments of profound joy. They married in a small, secret ceremony, their vows whispered in a time of great uncertainty, and in July of 1980, their son, Harry, was born. But even this joyous occasion was overshadowed by the dark wings of a prophecy. Sometime before Harry's birth, a prophecy had been made. Sybil Trelawney, the eccentric and often mocked divination professor, in a moment of true, unbidden foresight, had spoken the words to Albus Dumbledore during her job interview at the Hogshead Inn. The prophecy spoke of a child who would have the power to vanquish the Dark Lord. It stated, "The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches. Born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not." Part of this prophecy was overheard. The door to the private room where Dumbledore was conducting the interview was thrown open by the barman, and in that brief moment, a Death Eater who had been lurking nearby heard the first part of Trelawney's words. That Death Eater, of course, was Severus Snape, who, desperate to win the favor of the master he served, rushed to deliver the news. Voldemort now knew of the existence of a child who was destined to defeat him. The prophecy could have referred to one of 2 infant boys. Both were born at the very end of July 1980. Both were born to parents who were members of the Order of the Phoenix, and who had, against all odds, thrice defied Lord Voldemort. One was Neville Longbottom, the pure-blood son of the brave and respected Aurors, Frank and Alice Longbottom. The other was Harry Potter, the half-blood son of James and Lily Potter. Voldemort made his choice. For reasons known only to him, but perhaps rooted in his own half-blood heritage, he chose to believe that the half-blood child, the one who, like him, had one magical and one non-magical parent, was the greater threat. He marked Harry Potter as his equal. He decided that the infant son of James and Lily Potter must die. When Dumbledore, through his own network of spies, learned of Voldemort's terrible intention, he warned the Potters immediately. They were now the Dark Lord's primary targets. They had to go into hiding, betrayal and sacrifice. Trusting Dumbledore implicitly, James and Lily disappeared from the world. They took up residence in a small, charming cottage in Godric's Hollow, the very village where Iolanthe Peverell had lived centuries before, the place where the Potter and Peverell lines had first intertwined, a place steeped in the magic of their ancestors. Dumbledore advised them to use the Fidelius charm, an immensely powerful and complex piece of ancient magic that could conceal a secret inside the soul of a single living person. A house, a location, could be made utterly undiscoverable, as if it had ceased to exist, to everyone except the person designated as the Secret Keeper. The plan was for Dumbledore himself to be their secret keeper, the most logical and safest choice. But at the last minute, James and Lily, young, proud, and fiercely loyal to their friends, changed their minds. They placed their trust, their lives, and the life of their infant son in the hands of one of their oldest and dearest friends. James insisted that the secret keeper should be Sirius Black. Sirius was his best friend, closer than a brother. It was a decision born of love and trust. But Sirius, ever clever, ever thinking of ways to outsmart their enemies, came up with a plan he believed was a perfect double bluff. He argued that Voldemort would immediately suspect him, that he would be the obvious target for the Death Eaters to capture and torture. He suggested that, at the very last moment, they switch the Secret Keeper to someone no one would ever suspect. Someone weak, Untalented and utterly unassuming, he suggested they use Peter Pettigrew. It was a fatal, catastrophic mistake. For over a year, Peter Pettigrew, the timid, hero-worshipping member of the Marauders, had been a spy for Lord Voldemort. Terrified by Voldemort's overwhelming power, and convinced that the Order of the Phoenix could not win the war, he had betrayed his friends, feeding information to the Death Eaters in exchange for his own pathetic life. And now he was being handed the ultimate secret, the key to the Potter's very existence. The Fidelius charm was cast, and the secret of their location, the very knowledge of their continued life, was entrusted to Peter Pettigrew's small, treacherous soul. Less than a week later, he betrayed them. The night was October 31st, 1981, Halloween. Inside the cottage in Godric's Hollow, the Potter family was spending a quiet, happy evening together. The war felt 1,000,000 miles away. James was playing with 1-year-old Harry, using his wand to create puffs of colored smoke for his son to chase and giggle at. Lily was watching them from the armchair, her heart swelling with a love so fierce and so complete, it felt like a physical presence in the room. A love that was a fierce and protective shield against the fear that had become their constant companion for so long. And then the gate creaked. The front door burst open, blasted from its hinges. He was there, Lord Voldemort, his pale, snake-like face illuminated by the flickering jack-o'-lanterns on the porch, had come for them. James shouted to his wife, his voice raw with terror and a desperate, final courage, "Lily, take Harry and go. It's him. Run. I'll hold him off." He was brave, so incredibly brave. But he was without his wand. It was on the sofa, just out of reach. He had no chance. He stood between the Dark Lord and his family, a defiant, unarmed shield. The last thing Lily heard as she raced up the stairs, clutching her baby so tightly he was crying, was the cold, high, mirthless laugh of Lord Voldemort, and a flash of blinding green light. James Potter, son of Fleamont, descendant of Linfred, protector of his family, fell to the floor, dead at the age of 21. Lily reached the nursery and barricaded the door with furniture, her hands shaking, her mind racing with a desperate, hopeless prayer. She placed Harry in his crib, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She knew there was no escape. She could hear his slow, deliberate footsteps climbing the stairs. She turned to face the door, her body a living shield for her son. The door blasted open. Voldemort stood there, his red eyes narrowed, his face devoid of any emotion but cold, reptilian triumph. "Not Harry! Not Harry! Please not Harry!" Lily begged, her voice raw with terror and a love that transcended fear. "Stand aside, you silly girl. Stand aside now," Voldemort hissed, his voice a chilling whisper. "Not Harry, please no. Take me, kill me instead." Her pleas were a mother's final desperate bargain, an offer of her own life for her child's. "This is my last warning. Not Harry, please have mercy, have mercy." But Lord Voldemort, who had never known love, knew no mercy. With another flash of blinding green light, Lily Potter fell. She died protecting her son, her final act an outpouring of love so pure, so absolute, and so powerful that it invoked a magic that Voldemort, for all his immense power and knowledge of the dark arts, could not comprehend. It was an ancient and potent magic of sacrifice, a magic that flowed from the very heart of life itself. He turned to the crib. The child was looking up at him, his mother's green eyes wide with confusion, not fear. The path to his victory, to his immortality, was now clear. Voldemort raised his wand one last time and uttered the two words that had ended so many lives, the two words that had never failed him. Avada Kedavra. The jet of green light, the curse of death itself, shot from his wand and struck the baby in the forehead. But the curse did not kill him. Lily Potter's love, her selfless sacrifice, had created a magical shield around her son. A shield more powerful than any curse. The killing curse. The spell that had never failed rebounded. It struck Voldemort himself. In that moment, his body was utterly destroyed, ripped from his soul. His power shattered. He was vanquished, a mere shadow of his former self, less than the meanest ghost forced to flee into the darkest corners of the world to survive. The curse left a single, indelible mark on the boy in the crib, a scar shaped like a lightning bolt. The long and winding history of the Potter family, a story that began with a quiet, humble potioneer in a country garden, had reached its violent, tragic, and pivotal crescendo. For 900 years they had been potioneers, politicians, inventors, and fighters. They had lived quietly, loved fiercely, and stood for what was right. And in one final selfless act of love, the last of the Potter line, a Muggle-born witch, had saved the wizarding world. The boy in the crib, the orphan of Godric's Hollow, now carried the weight of that entire history, the legacy of Linfred's ingenuity, Ignotus's wisdom, Henry's courage, and his parents' love, in a tiny, lightning-shaped scar. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the history of the Potter family